Welcome back to the X-Files. For today's file, we'll be looking at a sports martial arts series from an author who hit it big once already, but what exactly happened to their second attempt? Let's boot up this file. Full name, Martial Master Asumi or Asumi Kakeru, often abbreviated as MMA, which is really clever and I can't praise whoever decided on that name enough. Created by Kawada. Start date June 19th, 2023. End date February 12th, 2024. Total chapters 32. For the English translation, we can thank Nova Skipper as well as David Evelyn. On lettering, we have Phil Christie, and for editing, Carla Clark as well as Kristen Eade. Kawada would begin their career outside of Jump's influence, first working as an assistant under Ryo Koshino on Ens Aoi, a medical drama manga. Supposedly, they would submit one-shots to Kodansha's Morning 2 magazine, a seinen manga publication, but come 2009, their entrant to the 77th Tezuka Award, Love and Justice, would win an honorable mention, which would shift Kawada's focus to shonen magazines. Perhaps because of their background, they were encouraged to work for a seinen magazine though, like Young Jump, but wished to at least try their hand at something that might fit Shonen Jump instead, which would land them an assistant job under Tadatoshi Fujimaki during his time working on Kuroko no Basket. Potentially during this time as well, he may have also worked on Barihaken under Shinya Suzuki, though information on most of Kawada's life and career remains a bit elusive. I find this a little interesting, especially the lack of documentation, since their first major work, Hinomaru Zumo, became a pretty big hit. Usually with X-Files, I'd have a few one-shots to talk about to show how an author may have developed, but not this time, as we go from the one-shot of Hinomaru Zumo, which would debut in Jump Next's spring issue of 2013, to it then being published in regular old Shonen Jump in issue 39 of 2013, to it being serialized for real in issue 26 of Shonen Jump 2014. Around 4 to 5 years of working as an assistant within Jump, Kawada's methodical approach had paid off, and it seemed like people enjoyed the concept of a sumo manga enough for it to take off. It would last for 250 chapters and would come to an end in 2019, having had a crossover with Kuroko's Basketball, a light novel, and an anime adaptation. After this big success, in May of 2020, the one-shot Heavy Metal Yankees would then be published in Shonen Jump issue 23. A big thanks to Manga Crash for helping me find the panels for this one. I might as well direct you to a video on MMA they've done too if you'd like someone else's take on the series. The link to his video will be in the description. I'm glad I can show off the art for this one-shot too, since this one alongside the next one-shot by Kawada are very different from Hinomaru Zumo and MMA, mostly due to them not taking place in modern settings. In particular though, Heavy Metal Yankees is a lot less grounded, with it being about some kind of cyborg boxing where the participants have augmented bodies, hence the heavy metal part I suppose. Also being a little zanier but still grounded in real-world history, Rebellion, debuting in 2022, would be a gladiatorial one-shot, seeing a bunch of gladiators battle it out and ultimately hatch a plan to rebel. This period would see Kawada branching out to different ideas, exploring settings and perhaps different tones, but still at the core of all of his works is fighting with a basis in the real world. Sumo, boxing, gladiatorial combat, he firmly has his niche. Alongside this, he has a very noticeable art style with buff, blocky characters that exude an aura of maturity. His art and works as a whole feel very solid, and perhaps that's what Jump needed, as it hadn't had a sports hit since Hinomaru Zumo's debut. So let's enter Kawada's newest series, Martial Master Asumi, and see how it fared within the magazine. Nito Asumi has always grown up surrounded by martial arts, thanks to his grandfather who runs a dojo. In his later years, the one thing that keeps him lucid and awake is practicing. His mind is only sharp when his body is active and doing things like throws or grapples. Though over time, things have slipped into disarray for Nito after his father's passing. This event fractured his family in parts. Nito stepped away from martial arts. Baku, his grandfather, fell into a deep sorrow when dementia took hold of his mind, and Kazuro, his brother, left seemingly now divorced from the goings-on of the household. The early parts of MMA see Nito in school, interacting with his friend Yuya and giving us the lowdown on his family history. Try as he might to divorce himself from fighting, it always seems to hound him, be it with his training with his grandpa, which he does as an act of service or love, or through school bullying. Furthermore, an upperclassmate at school has her eyes on Nito too, now Okiba, a practitioner of MMA whose dad runs the Yoshi's MMA gym. An element I really love about MMA is it focusing on both men's and women's sport. Usually you'd get one or the other, and in the case of Jump, female sport is pretty rare or isn't nearly as focused on. You will see it from time to time, though I'd say it crops up when romance is involved predominantly, whereas a decent chunk of MMA touches on Nao's career too, which isn't bound solely by her feelings for someone else. She just really likes to fight and adores the sport. In contrast, Nito is built up as a character that does not like MMA, initially anyway, with him wanting to go into the field of healthcare as a profession, to look after and nurture people like his grandpa. Caring for others and fighting, this dichotomy isn't mutually exclusive though. Deep within Nito, there is a desire to fight, which comes out when he gets bullied. All the time spent sparring with his grandpa comes out, all the aggression, the force necessary to win and dominate his opponents. He's not sure how he feels about this, but there is something intoxicating about it. Nao sees this too and drags him over to their gym, making him a regular member. This is pretty much the beginnings of MMA. It's a slow start that introduces you to many characters, planting seeds for the future with a focus on building up who Nito is, as well as what his family dynamics are. It also explains MMA, the martial art, in a slow but understandable way. Nao's dad, Yoshitoki, helps with this a bunch and is a very good mentor-type character. There are points later on that characterize him well. He's stern, does things by the books, and cares deeply, but will bend the rules a bit to make people happy, so long as they're safe. What ends up really firing the series up though is the return of Kazuro, Nito's elder brother and currently pro MMA fighter under the name Kaz Low. He is bigger, more imposing and sharper in design than Nito, putting emphasis on finding strength and letting go of his family to attain it. Based on what we've seen before of the Asumis, he starts as a really gripping antagonist. Furthermore, after Yuya is hurt in an incident involving Kaz, Nito has had enough and squares up to fight him early on within the series. This may be the peak of MMA for me. While there's a lot of interesting stuff to come, the dynamic between the brothers is really interesting, and in only a few chapters, emotional stakes are set up that make their initial bout and the build up to it very engaging. Central to this is Nito's motives. There is resentment and anger within Nito for Kaz abandoning his family, though what shines through most of all is this care, a want for Kazuro to reunite with their grandpa who may not have much time left. These intersecting complex emotions and family dynamics make Martial Master Asumi go from a slow, subtle start to something brilliant. It hooks its fangs into you and puts you on the same stage as Nito, immersing you into the world of MMA and his family issues. A character's reason for fighting gradually becomes a major focus for the series from this point on, especially since we have to introduce many other characters for both leads to fight. Now, for instance, fights seemingly out of passion, but actually that's something that's been somewhat waning, with more of a focus on revenge brewing within her for a past brutal defeat. Her little journey to get through that and realize why she's fighting is multifaceted. It's a really enthralling part of the series that's mirrored through Nito too, who over the course of fighting many other characters learns to love fighting, to love the process, learning new techniques, and using those techniques in a way that will grant him the thrill of winning and standing over defeated opponents. A large swath of these opponents appear in an early arc in an underground MMA tournament, the Dropout, which Nito attends, at first to the disapproval of Yoshi, but there is a really nice moment where, despite not feeling it, Yoshi agrees that Nito can go on to do the Dropout so long as he's there to support Nito as his second. I really like this character Kawada managed to make. He's realistically kind and caring as an adult that honestly feels as though they want to protect the younger generation and nurture a love of the sport within them. It could be a stand-in for Kawada himself, as he really wants to push this love of MMA in a safe and natural way. As for the fighters in the Dropout, we have the host fighter, Meruto Kejina, who seems more focused on looking cool. Nito also takes him out with a single flying knee, showing just how important proper strategy is for MMA. A single unexpected, unguarded move could be your downfall. Kinojo Sakura is a really energetic fighter, effectively seeing a different shonen protagonist intersect with the series, a delinquent knowing no real fighting style, just battling Nito with raw guts. He's funny, admirable, and enjoyable to watch fight, if you're familiar with this type of character from other shonen manga. Him using rider kicks and focusing on wanting to be the strongest in this childlike, idealistic way is also a unique type of reason to want to fight, which the series showcases. Taiga Amagaki is Nito's final opponent here, and is built up as his eventual sub-rival, someone his own age to grow alongside other than Kazuro. Much like Nito and Nao's arcs, his is also heavily involved with family in a way, or lack thereof, being an orphan. He is a character familiar with a difficult upbringing, and his fighting style reflects that too, being trained in a not-so-nice gym. Despite everything though, he does care, especially for his newfound family at the orphanage. What I like about MMA and all of these characters and their reasons for fighting is that they're clear. You understand what propels and drives them to fight. It doesn't matter if it's for grand reasons, personal revenge, to make someone else proud, or for the love of the sport, or the feeling it gives you while you're in the ring. They're all valid and human. And more importantly, MMA also understands the value of you having multiple reasons to do the same thing. A love of something often isn't based on a sole factor, but a multitude of big and small things coalescing. This idea makes the imagery of Shadow Nito, I'll call him, more compelling. This isn't just a power-up or some different persona that wants to destroy and beat people and dominate people, but of also someone finding a hidden joy in an activity they're participating in. Nito slips into this state and uses the Asumi style reflexively, but he learnt this style through countless hours of care. Not focused on attaining strength or a specific move, but out of a love for his grandfather. His grandfather's teachings, his love, has been passed on through the act of throws and grabs, through meticulous physical training. For a character that has dementia and the story partially being about Nito not wanting himself and Kaz to forget his grandpa, there is an underlying sweetness to all of this. Some ways we communicate are physical. Martial arts can be one of those, and while the series doesn't outright spell this out, I feel it is something that came across to me while reading. We only see him briefly too, but this also extends to Nito's late father. The time they did spend together sparring comes back to him in fights as well. Nito remembers his family through this activity, which pops up in bittersweet ways, like when he calls Yoshi his father when he's in this lucid state in the Dropout arc. I think this might be the most interesting part of MMA, this connection between martial arts and memory and love, and how we connect to different things and how we communicate in different ways, and I really wish it got to explore this more. Nito would come to win the Dropout tournament, and afterwards he gets heaped with more notoriety and characters are introduced aplenty to the story. We do get a spotlight on a few. Notably, I want to bring up Ayako Hanagasaki, who has a match with Nao. She's the rich girl archetype, like Karen from Street Fighter. She even has ringlets and fights with a style based on fencing. She also loves Bruce Lee, which I think is super adorable. My favorite character of the entire series for sure. She possesses a bunch of fun, contrasting design and personality elements that come together to make her a very appealing character. Shotaro Kuronuma is another character who gets focused on towards the end of the series, being Nito's initial opponent to help him enter the pro sphere. He's an older fighter, one that's reliable though hasn't truly made it big, and with his family to attend to, his final match may be against Nito if he loses. As I've mentioned, the theme of what drives or motivates people to fight, as well as family being explored through fighters, is prominent throughout the series, but it's very clear cut here. Martial arts manga often will have an arc like this, where the main character becomes aware of the stakes involved. Their opponents might be ill, or this could be their last match. I don't feel this is the best version of this I've ever seen, though it serves to bolster the series' ideas well and gives us one final full match, including build-up. I like the focus on Kuronuma choosing his family at the end, though the way it's framed does irk me, with him saying he chose reality over, well, MMA and what he loves. Maybe with time, the series could have shown him doing more with MMA in his spare time, like coaching or just training for the fun of it. The way it was handled here, I feel didn't mesh too well with how broad MMA has been up to this point, with letting characters have nuanced multiple motivations. People can attend to family and love a sport. In this moment, it's trying too hard to be overdramatic, I think. To end everything, we see Kazuro's perspective on his family and MMA, being enamored by the strength of his grandfather but annoyed at how hidden the Asumi gym and style was. Kaz did his best to make his grandfather proud, and perhaps after the passing of his dad, clung to one of the closest relatives he had left, but the dementia had already set in. Everything was beginning to slip away, and not just memories of family, but I think Kaz also feared the Asumi style would slip away too, the legacy of his family. Out of anger, he lashed out at the world, fighting people in the streets, which landed him into trouble, and over time, MMA, an outlet for all of these heavy feelings. The series end in Jump saw the two brothers face off, with us at least knowing a bit about both, but not seeing the outcome of their fight. In the volume release of MMA, we get a bit more detailing where the characters end up or grew. Nothing is really set in stone though. We do get a fake out resolution as well, which I honestly don't appreciate very much, and then I feel mixed on the final page, which sees Baku acknowledge Nito for once, not calling him Kaz, but it's nice, but it's also quite hollow and it feels unearned. So MMA builds and builds and suddenly comes to a close, which is fairly typical for cancelled works in Jump. Before we discussed why it might have been axed and the magazine at the time, first let's talk about the series and what I think it did well and not so well. Realism is a tricky word. What is realistic is ill-defined and will differ from person to person. Many decisions in MMA are tinged with what I'm going to call hints of realism, and it can aid in the characters feeling more fleshed out, but it also hinders. There's more than a few moments where I think the series would benefit from leaning into something a bit less realistic, something more operatic. A prime example is the character of Kazuro, the way he's built up and how the build-up is quickly deflated. I mentioned his initial appearance earlier, it being a highlight of the series, but soon after he's introduced in this way, a lot of the tension he carries regarding his family is dissipated because we find out he's actually on good terms with most of the family, even sending money to them. He just hasn't spoken to Nito or Baku specifically. On one hand, I feel like if this were real life, maybe something like this would be more realistic. It's not as cartoonishly angsty to abandon your entire family, but for what amounts to mostly a joke and making him slightly more approachable as a character, I don't feel like this writing decision was worth it. The core difference between Nito and Kaz could have driven the series harder. They do a lot of heavy lifting, but I can't help but feel his character was marred. A half measure was taken to make him seem more palatable or nuanced at a point where he didn't need to be. It would have also made his eventual return and Nito beating him feel even better if he was fully divorced from his family. The fake-out dream of him meeting his grandpa also muddies the water for me too. I'd rather not have seen it all in all. Another example of this realism or MMA kneecapping itself with its ideas is with Tiger. I know it's for a referential jokey reason, but he dons a tiger mask initially, an homage to the famous manga and pro wrestling character. It's just discarded really quickly though, in a way that makes me feel as though MMA is unwilling to commit to certain ideas, notably the ones that feel a bit more over the top or antagonistic in a potential effort to be more realistic or grounded. Tiger is set up to be another more antagonistic character for Nito, though over the course of the dropout, I feel he's just sanded down just like Kaz. It's ironic considering I feel the series likes to have its characters juggle these compounding motivations for why they do things, more personal reasons and more caricatured ones, though as a whole, it juggles its tone rather poorly. This also stings at points when the series talks about what reality is. It's shoehorned in, I feel, like in the Kuronuma fight. This series shows so much love for the sport and people's desire to get better at it and fight, but I'm reading a Shonen Jump manga. The bounds of reality should be shattered. Your passion should shine through in grand ways or subtle ones. Reality and realism be damned. To dial it back a bit, despite my complaints, not only is MMA a very robust series, its art is technical, well drawn and clear, it's punchy in action scenes, and all the holds and grapples aren't too confusing. Its emotional moments are conveyed well through expressions too. It also lays everything out in a clear to understand way, drip feeding you on MMA basics as you progress. It also possesses heart through its exploration of the Asumi family, their struggles and bonds, and want to still connect and love each other. It illustrates well the emotions that can be wrought from martial arts. It shows how everyone is different in fighting style and motivation, and for Kawada to capture that in a relatively short amount of time is something that deserves to be praised. Moving onward, why exactly do I think the series was cancelled? Aside from the usual things you could point to, lack of interest, lower sales than expected, yada yada, one of the big things is it being a sports manga. Something that hasn't done very well in Jump for a long time, and as I've illustrated in other sports-based X-Files, usually in Jump you either soar high with a sports series and reach the peak of the magazine, or you fall off a cliff. Funnily enough, Kawada's prior series Hinamaru Zumo lies somewhere in the middle, though MMA wasn't blessed with that fate, though it did get a longer grace period than most axes. The subject of martial arts as well hasn't ever been especially popular in Jump, bar boxing, which I'd say was much bigger throughout the 70s to 90s and since has died down considerably. A lot of martial arts series that get popular these days I feel tend to swerve to magazines with higher age demographics as they can get away with a bit more brutality or fit in more mature stories. Jump just seemingly hasn't been the ripest ground for stuff like this. Its rival magazines tend to fare a bit better, though its old Ippo is still thriving in magazine, for example, and Sunday has its own MMA series, Red Blue, which isn't super popular, but it is trucking along. I'd recommend that, by the way, if you'd like another newer MMA series to get into. While I think MMA possesses quality, what it maybe lacks is ferocity, something gripping beyond solid art and writing that will get people through the door. Looking at the magazine at the time it ended, it seems as though a choice was made. Do they axe the Mama Yu Kagurabachi to an ice bash earlier, or go for some older series which aren't pulling the weight they wanted to, and it seems they went with the latter, cutting Cypher Academy somewhat short as well as MMA. I do feel like there was potential room for them to keep this, and should MMA have gotten past this period of early 2024, it may have stayed within the magazine. As usual, I like to hear what others have to say about each series I cover here. Are there any other perspectives I might not have accounted for? Well, let's check what the X-Files office's Discord has to say. We had a number of responses this time, with many being quite in-depth. And to start out, we have Jesus Flash, who found the concept of Asumi going to lesbian brothels to be quite novel for Jump. Wait a second, that's not the right series. They found MMA to be a competent sports series, saying it executed on its framework well, including the introduction of its main characters in Nito and Now, as well as their supporters and challengers, which helped illuminate their strengths and weaknesses. On the other hand, they bring it up being too by the numbers, citing it not having much uniqueness, mentioning the problems I also had with it diffusing tension quickly. Another thing they bring up is the idea that the entire series should have been focused on Now, since her setup is a lot more nuanced and interesting than Nito's. Flipping the script and making Nito and Baku the sidecast for her story was something they also brought up. To add to this, I also like her subtler arc about finding the joy in fighting again through tutoring Nito and observing his journey. There's a lot of compelling stuff about her which I think could have made MMA more interesting on the whole, though a story like this might be outside of Jump's wheelhouse. This review holds seeds which other reviews also share or extrapolate on, namely people struggling with its protagonist Nito and it not committing to its ideas hard enough. Demon Summoning Enthusiast found it promised more than it ended up delivering on, bringing up the diffusing tension of Chapter 8 with Kazuro. Furthermore, they found a lot of characters not likable in design and personality, pointing to Nito's wishy-washiness, which could be linked to the overall lack of commitment to some ideas. There's a lack of cohesion to a lot of its core cast and what they want to do at points, and while I did praise how the series juggles coexisting reasonings for fighting, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a little messy at points too. Case in point, the aforementioned moment in Chapter 8, which Lumi dissects in great detail, an event that potentially harms Nito's likability as the protagonist. I share in these frustrations greatly from a story writing perspective, but also in the idea that this horrible miscommunication between brothers just sucks. The family doesn't step in at all, and it serves to dull both characters. Sometimes miscommunication can work. Thematically, it can be the central point of a work, or give you some dumb, silly scenes in comedies or romances, but here it feels ill-considered and not really ripe for exploration. Mixed in with this critique were positives though, and while flawed, MMA has its highlights. Lumi states that Nito and Kazuro can be compelling at points with their messy relationship, and Nito's focus on wanting to do elderly care and MMA as well is something that makes him compelling. I feel as though this review illuminates that some of its ideas and attempts were perhaps not misguided. They aimed to create richer characters, but Kawada went about it poorly at points, perhaps jumping the gun when he should have let things simmer a bit more. As a less charitable perception of coexisting motivations amongst characters, Wildheart Razorfangs critiques the lack of cohesion the series possesses by referring to it as a pendulum, illustrating Nito's motivations as rather fragmented, drifting from him being afraid of violence to his innate brutality. Him being afraid of fighting isn't touched on in a convincing or clear enough way. Razorfangs brings up a lack of reflection here, and while the series could have gradually built on Nito, I do agree with the sentiment here, and with others, that again, there's a lack of commitment to certain ideas or developments, and the series isn't long enough or super well written enough to tackle something in a complex way where it can juggle this effectively. Melons illustrates things differently in their review, focusing more on the characters being multifaceted, likening Kazuro at the beginning of the story as a bad guy, but by its end being just a guy. This grounded approach they mentioned worked well, even incorporating some more zany characters into the mix who feel right at home after they get some time to breathe, like Sakura or Hanagasaki. Alongside this though, there is the general critique that while everything is technically quite well done, especially on the fighting front, it doesn't feel all that unique or special. The manga goes through the motions, and I want to highlight the part in this review about it not taking risks and playing it safe far too often, which many reviews and myself have brought up plenty. It's a shame, but for as much as I remembered people loving this series, a good few people this time have noticed parts which don't hold up too well or flat out feel there isn't much special at MMA's core. Some people did really endear themselves to the series through various elements though, one being its protagonist Nito, as Kinky found his awkwardness fun, citing his relationships with the rest of the cast to be a strength of the series. They also point out much of the cast being great too, from supporting actors like Nao and Taiga to antagonists like Kazutora and Okome. Some weight is also put on the fact that all of these characters have their own goals and motivations too, making the world presumably feel a lot more well realized with all these different fighters from different promotions. People like Violent and Last of the Red Rose cite enjoying it mainly for the characters too, along with Netic, who found the axe to be undeserved, throwing more praise on its action and its general pacing. They found that the focus on characters being different in motivation and fighting style added a lot to the series, contributing to the overall idea of how people grow to love the sport. St. Crimson 667 brings their first review to the Axe Files, noting that this is basically their first Axe manga and it hurt them deeply when it did go. Being a fan of Hinomaruzumo, they were eager to see another work by Kawada, though they did start to notice a lot of issues or reasons why it might have been cut, citing its initial slow pace as a big reason. Potentially this was due to MMA being a comparatively newer sport for Japan, so setting it up as well as the world of MMA was an important consideration. There's also something neat St. Crimson highlights where, unlike Hinomaru in Hinomaruzumo, Nito doesn't initially love his sport. I think this illuminates some issues people have with the series, and unfortunately, Nito may not be the best protagonist for this story. There is of course room to grow, but many people have pointed out his wishy-washiness, which takes a long time to be phased out, and ultimately, if the protagonist doesn't care about the sport enough, why should you? Even so, St. Crimson does go on to state that the slow start makes the end better. All the build-up does make Nito a somewhat compelling character, and later fights involving both Nito and Nao are the best in the series. I really like the praise here. It's earnest and viewed alongside a critical lens. St. Crimson seems to know what they're talking about as a fan of Kawada, and they complement his ability to illustrate intricate and engaging fights. Kawada's love for the sport he covers comes across in his work, and the love for Kawada and their manga shines through in this review and many others too. Following the conclusion of Martial Master Asumi, we haven't received any news of Kawada, no new series or one-shots, though I don't think that's particularly surprising since they seem to value their privacy. The gap between Hinamaru and MMA was also several years, with only 2 one-shots being published in between, so perhaps Kawada is just gradually working on their next project. Potentially, they may even be thinking about switching demographics, since as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, they did start in the seinen manga space with Morning Magazine. I feel like we will see Kawada again at some point, though for the purposes of this video, it's a bit of a dull end due to the radio silence, but this does bring the Axe File on Martial Master Asumi to a close. A solid sports work that many enjoyed, but wasn't quite what Jump was looking for. What do you think about Martial Master Asumi though? Do you enjoy it? Was it a step up or down from Hinamaru Zumo? Are there any thoughts you feel weren't explored in this video, like on the more technical aspects of martial arts or sports that I'm unfamiliar with? I'd love to hear what you have to say about the series in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe and share it around, it helps a ton. If this is your first Axe File and you'd like to hear me yap about more cancelled manga, I have plenty other videos like this as part of a playlist which range from newer stuff from around the same time as MMA like Mama Yu Yu, or even to some older manga like Hirohiko Araki's Bao the Visitor, which he did before JoJo. And speaking of old manga, if you're a fan of Shonen Jump and would like to know more about what was in the magazine years ago, then perhaps check out my History of Shonen Jump series. Here I run through what the magazine was like year by year from its very beginning, with me recently getting to talk about the year One Piece debuted in. It's a lot of fun if you're a big fan of Jump or manga magazines in general. I also want to give a big thank you to all of my patrons who helped vote this series in and give me the support necessary to dedicate enough time to make these videos. If you'd like to join, you can for as little as $1 a month, and you'll get access to polls where you can suggest what Axe manga I covered next, as well as a small catalogue of bonus videos. For any patrons at the $3 tier or above, you'll also get a unique little doodle drawn by me to represent you in the thank you credits of all my videos, like these cool people. Thank you, Trinity, Jade, Kazuku Gairu, Soroquel Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Faco, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Yuzakura Psycho, Wurzel, Violent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vino Burrito, Caffeine Dad, Cryonaut, Crash, 41IZ, Hong, Jamie Reynolds, Manu, Pokey Emblem, James Miller, Joba Monkey, Just a Virus, Star Sphinx, PK Broly, Fenrir Black, Elijah Espinoza, Neo Humanoid, Mark Nielsen, Electro Pirate, Jay Vasso, 3 Frogs in a Trenchcoat, Sir Flash, Gay Shark, Slimy Okra, Kidista, Wavy Sky, TG Talks Manga, John Jerry 722, Andrew, Xenomat, Missile, Terra Elizabeth, Stratomega 13, Dennis Tambik, Jubei, Lise, Frogdude, Back on Earth, Yestin Maikage, Hilltop, Vaco Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, John Sanford, Color, Jaime, Strawberry Prosione, Vaz, Palette, Ruina, Juice, Chromie Knox, Eric Gorski, Mr. Shira, Grizz Exploder, Dextora, Ennio Showo, Cheese, Emmy, Benjamin, Tenmaku Lover, Taifumi Studios, Ignate, and Iliades. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.